She thought she had already won. She thought the moment they put my daughter in the ground, I was finished. Just an old man with nowhere to go and no one left to fight for. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that my daughter was a builder. And builders don't leave their foundations exposed. I spent 35 years as an architect. I designed hospitals, libraries, a federal courthouse in Tucson that is still standing today. I understand, at a cellular level, that the most important part of any structure is never the part you can see. The marble lobby, the glass facade, the sweeping staircase, those are for the people visiting. The foundation, the rebar running 20 feet into the earth, the load-bearing walls hidden inside the drywall, those are for the building itself. Those are what make it survive. My daughter Claire understood this. She learned it from me. And when she knew her time was running short, she applied it to the only thing she had left to protect. Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you've ever had to trust someone's plan, even when you couldn't see the whole picture, hit that like button. You're going to understand exactly what I mean by the end of this. My daughter built Cloud Nest Solutions from a laptop at her kitchen table when she was 29 years old. Cloud infrastructure management. The kind of back-end work most people never see, but every major company depends on. By the time she was 36, she had 42 employees and a company valued at $45 million. She did it without a trust fund, without connections, without anyone handing her a single thing. She did it the way I taught her to do everything, methodically, precisely, one load-bearing decision at a time. Her husband, my son-in-law, was 41 years old and had spent the better part of a decade living well on Claire's success. He was handsome in a polished, expensive way, the kind of man who always looked like he'd just stepped off a yacht. He had a talent for being in rooms where important things were happening without ever being the reason they happened. Claire loved him. I never understood it, but I accepted it because she was my daughter and her judgment in most things was extraordinary. I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had. When Claire was diagnosed with ALS 18 months before she died, everything changed. Not for her, she kept working, kept building, kept showing up to the office in her wheelchair with the same focused intensity she'd always had. But for him, the change in my son-in-law was subtle at first, like a hairline crack in a wall. A new irritability, a restlessness, long nights out with clients that stretched into weekends. I noticed. Claire noticed too. She said nothing to me about it directly. She was too busy trying to hold her company together with diminishing motor control and a brain that was still, heartbreakingly, perfectly sharp. 8 months before she died, she called me. I was at my house in Phoenix, the small adobe place I'd bought after retirement, the one with the garden that reminded me of her mother. Her voice on the phone was slower than it used to be, the ALS already pulling at the edges of her speech. But her words were precise. "Dad," she said, "I need you here. I can't manage the caregivers alone," and a pause, a careful breath. "I don't want to be alone with Marcus." I didn't ask questions. I called a realtor that afternoon. I listed the Phoenix house, liquidated my retirement accounts, and moved everything into a cash position. I was in their driveway in Scottsdale with my 2 suitcases 3 weeks later. I want to be honest about what those 8 months were. They were the greatest privilege and the worst pain of my life, existing simultaneously, inseparable from each other. I watched my daughter, this woman I had poured every good thing in me, into disappear, piece by piece, while her mind stayed present and aware, inside a body that was betraying her. I adjusted her pillows. I read to her at night when the caregivers went home. I held her hand through the bad hours. My son-in-law was there. But he was there the way furniture is there, present, occupying space, not particularly useful. He traveled for business development that he never seemed to close. He had long phone calls behind closed doors that he ended abruptly when I walked past. I said nothing. Claire was my focus. 2 weeks before she died, she had a good day. Those days were rare and precious. She was more alert, her words coming a little easier. She asked me to sit on the edge of her hospital bed, the one we'd set up in the room overlooking the Sonoran Desert, the saguaros standing like old guards outside the window, and she took my hand. "Dad, she said. I need to tell you something, and then I need you to make me a promise. I told her I was listening. Marcus is going to inherit everything. The house, the company, stock, all of it. I want you to know that's intentional. She watched my face. Don't react. Just listen. I kept my face still. It cost me something. I know what he's going to do, she said. Her voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I know who he is. I've known for a long time. But I also know who you are, and I know who I am. A small, exhausted smile. I'm your daughter. I'm an architect too, Dad. I just work in software. She squeezed my hand with what strength she had left. I built a structure, and I need you to trust it. After I'm gone, things are going to happen fast. He's going to do what he does, and I need you to promise me that you will not interfere. You won't fight him. You won't call lawyers. You won't react. You will let it go exactly where it's going to go. She looked at me. Promise me. I wanted to argue. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to ask questions, to push back, to understand the plan before agreeing to it. But she was 2 weeks from the end of her life, and she was looking at me with her mother's eyes. And I promised her. I promise, sweetheart, I said. I'll let it play out. She closed her eyes, and her grip relaxed, and she said one more thing, so softly I almost missed it. The architect always signs the building, Dad, even when she's not there to see it standing. We buried her on a Thursday. The desert that morning was the kind of blue that looks painted. There were maybe 60 people at the service, her employees, mostly. People who had worked beside her and clearly loved her. My son-in-law stood at the front in a perfectly fitted black suit and cried with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that crying was expected and had prepared accordingly. I stayed through the reception, afterward at the house. People came and went, offering the usual inadequate words. And I accepted them and thanked them and meant none of it because grief doesn't actually have a language. By early evening, the last of the guests were gone. The caterers were clearing plates. My son-in-law found me in Claire's office. It was the one room that still smelled like her. Her perfume, her hand lotion, the faint electrical smell of the servers she kept humming in the corner, because she'd always worked from home. I was standing at her desk, not touching anything, just standing there. He leaned against the doorframe. He had loosened his tie. His eyes were dry. I had a meeting with the estate attorney this morning, he said, before the service. I looked at him. Claire was very thorough, he said, his tone carrying something that was almost admiration. The company stock, the house, all of it comes to me. He straightened up, which means I need to start thinking about next steps, getting things organized. He paused, and his voice shifted into something practiced and final. This is going to be a big transition. I need space to process, to figure things out without, he gestured vaguely at me, without extra complications. I looked at him for a long moment. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but only slightly. I need you to find somewhere else to stay, he said. I sold my home. Those were the only words I said. I sold my home to be here, for your wife. For your wife's last 8 months on earth. He shrugged the smallest possible shrug. I know. And that was kind of you. But Claire's gone now, and this is my house. He let that sit. I'd like you to be out by tomorrow morning. I looked around the office one more time, at Claire's diplomas on the wall, at the framed photo of the two of us at her company's opening, her 29 years old and grinning, me with my arm around her shoulders and my whole chest full of pride. He was following my gaze. I'll be putting most of her personal items in storage, he said. The estate sale company is coming Monday to assess everything. There's no point keeping things that just... He trailed off. Just remind him of her, I thought. Just make the house feel like it belonged to someone he now found inconvenient. I walked toward the door. He stepped aside. I passed him in the hallway, and he said, quietly, and with a precision that I believed was intentional, "You're a guest here, Raymond. You've always been a guest. Don't forget that." I kept walking. I went to the guest room, picked up my 2 suitcases still packed from Phoenix I'd never fully unpacked, as if some part of me had always known, and I walked out the front door of my daughter's house into the Scottsdale night. I sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. I was trying to locate my grief, which had been so consuming an hour ago, and I found it was still there, but it had been joined by something else, something cold and structural and patient, a voice that sounded like my daughter saying, "I built a structure. Trust it." I drove to Frank's house. Frank was my oldest friend. We'd worked together for 20 years, him in contracting and me in design, building half the institutional buildings in the Phoenix metro area between us. He was 71, recently widowed himself, and when I pulled up to his house in Mesa at 9:30 at night with 2 suitcases in my trunk, he opened the door before I could knock, handed me a beer, and said, "I figured it'd be tonight or tomorrow night. Come in." I sat at his kitchen table and I told him everything. The full 8 months, the phone calls behind closed doors, the way my son-in-law had cried at the service with the efficiency of a professional. The conversation in Claire's office, the guest room remark. Frank sat across from me and listened without interrupting, which is one of his great qualities. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, turning his beer bottle in his hands. "So what's the plan?" he said. "Claire had one," I said. "She made me promise to let it run." Frank looked at me the way you look at someone who's just told you they're going to let a wildfire burn through their property because they've been promised it won't reach the house. "And you trust that?" I thought about my daughter standing in front of her first completed server infrastructure at 29. I thought about the way she'd explained it to me once, "Dad, every system has dependencies. You have to understand the dependencies before you can understand the system." I thought about 2 weeks ago, her exhausted and precise. "I'm an architect too. I just work in software." "Completely," I said. Frank gave a slow nod. "All right, then I'm your eyes and ears on the ground. I've got people everywhere in this city. You won't have to go looking for information. It'll come to me." And it did. The first report came 3 days after the funeral. My son-in-law had brought a woman to the house, a woman who was not Claire and who was not a grieving friend. They'd been seen at the restaurant downtown, the one Claire had loved, the one where she and I had eaten lunch the week before she got her diagnosis. He'd posted a photo on Instagram with the caption, "Starting to breathe again." I read it in Frank's kitchen and said nothing. I drank my coffee. I thought about the structural integrity of a building during demolition, how the demolition team always thinks they're in control, right up until the moment the load-bearing wall turns out to be somewhere they didn't expect. The second report came a week later. My son-in-law had gone to the bank. Not Claire's operating account that he'd already discovered held almost nothing, as Claire had systematically reinvested everything back into the company over the past 18 months, but to the private wealth management firm that held the assets tied to Cloudnest Solutions. Frank's source was a woman who worked as an administrative assistant in the building. She told Frank that my son-in-law had arrived in a very nice car, wearing a very expensive watch, and had asked to speak with the senior advisor. He had been confident and relaxed. He had explained that he was the sole heir to the Cloudnest Solutions estate. He had asked to discuss liquidating the position. The senior advisor had been very professional and very sorry. He had explained, as gently as possible, that the $45 million valuation was a valuation, an assessment of what the company was worth, not a pile of money sitting in an account. It was stock in a privately held corporation. It was not cash. It could not be transferred like cash. Liquidating it would require finding a buyer for a private company stake, which required a process, which required approvals. My son-in-law had stared at the advisor for a long moment. "What approvals?" he'd asked. The advisor had referred him to the company's operating agreement. Frank told me this, with the satisfaction of a man watching a building he always suspected was poorly constructed fail its first real load test. I appreciated his satisfaction. I didn't share it outright. Claire wouldn't have wanted me to. She'd built something serious here, and it deserved to be treated seriously. "He's going to find the other things soon," I said. "The house?" Frank said. "The house?" I said. He found it faster than I expected. He was apparently moving quickly now. The shock of discovering the $45 million wasn't a checking account had lit a fire under him. He wanted out. He wanted cash. He wanted to convert everything Claire had built into something he could hold in his hand and spend. He listed the house 10 days after the funeral. Scottsdale, luxury real estate, 4,000 square feet, pool, mountain views, the kind of property that moved fast when it was priced right. He priced it right. He had an offer within a week, a cash offer from a developer who wanted the lot. The closing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. I heard about the closing from Frank, who heard about it from his network, which at this point I had started to think of as a minor intelligence operation. I said nothing. I made no calls. I did not contact the title company. I did not need to. Claire had handled this. The closing was at a title company in North Scottsdale. My son-in-law arrived in his new car, not Claire's car. A new one he'd apparently acquired with a real estate agent who projected aggressive cheerfulness. The buyer's attorneys were there. The title officer ran the standard search. I wasn't in the room, but Frank's network reaches into places that would surprise you, and the account I received was detailed. The title officer's computer flagged it about 40 minutes into the process. He looked at his screen. He read it twice. Touring. He made a phone call that he stepped into the hallway to complete. When he came back, he looked at my son-in-law with the careful neutrality of someone about to deliver bad news to a stranger. "Sir," he said, "I'm showing a secured lien on this property." My son-in-law's smile didn't move. "What kind of lien?" "A promissory note, secured debt. The property was pledged as collateral for a private loan." The title officer turned his screen slightly. "Filed 14 months ago. The lien holder would need to be paid out of proceeds at closing, or we can't transfer clear title." The buyer's lead attorney had already opened his briefcase to put papers away. He'd done this before. He knew what a flagged title search meant. "How much?" my son-in-law said, his voice now carrying a new quality, thin, careful, like a man walking across ice he hasn't tested. The title officer consulted his screen. The principal amount was $2 million, with accrued interest as specified in the note. The current payoff figure is approximately $2,140,000. My son-in-law breathed out. $2 million. Fine, whatever. Pay it out of the sale. There's plenty of margin. The title officer shook his head, not unkindly. "Sir, the terms of the note don't work that way. This isn't a mortgage that passes with the property. This is a secured promissory note with a specific maturity clause." The full amount became due and payable. He looked at the document. 60 days following the death of Claire Harmon. He looked up. That date has passed. The note is in default. The buyer's attorney stood up. "We'll need to pause the closing pending resolution of the lien." "Resolution," my son-in-law started. "We can't take title on a property with a defaulted secured debt. Our client's exposure?" "Fine," my son-in-law said, and his voice had gone strange and flat. "Fine. Who?" He stopped. He looked at the title officer. "Who holds the note? What bank?" The title officer read from his screen. "It's not a bank. The secured party is listed as a small pause, the pause of someone reading a name that changes everything. Raymond Harmon." The room went very quiet. My son-in-law sat in his chair. Frank's source, who was not in the room but heard this from the buyer's attorney over drinks that evening, told Frank that my son-in-law had the look of a man who had just realized, too late, that the exit he'd been running toward was a wall. "My father-in-law," he said. The words came out flat and airless. "That would appear to be correct," the title officer said. The buyer's attorney had already closed his briefcase. "We'll be in touch once the lien situation is resolved. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He was not particularly sorry. He was a professional who had seen this before and knew it wasn't his problem. They left. The deal was dead. My son-in-law sat alone in the closing room with his real estate agent and a title officer who very much wanted to go to lunch. I heard about this at 2:30 in the afternoon, sitting in Frank's backyard. The Arizona heat was extraordinary, the way it always is in June, a dry, solid wall of it. I was reading a book on Renzo Piano's building designs, the kind of reading I'd put off for years. Frank brought out 2 glasses of iced tea and sat across from me and said, "The closing fell apart." I put the book down. "I know. He's going to call you." "I know. What are you going to tell him?" I looked out across Frank's yard at the desert plants. Claire had always loved the brittle bush, the palo verde with its green bark. She used to say the desert was the most honest landscape on earth because it didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. "That depends," I said, "on what he asks." He called it 417. I looked at the number unknown, but I'd been expecting it, and I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Raymond. His voice was tight. Controlled, but just barely. The way a structure looks, controlled right before it fails. I need to talk to you. All right, I said. The house. A breath. There's apparently a lien on the house. In your name. A $2 million lien. I waited. I need you to release it, he said. Call your attorney and have it released. The sale, I have a buyer. $2 million isn't a problem. There's enough equity. But the terms of the note, he stopped himself. Start it again. I just need you to release it. It's Claire and I, this was our house. You don't have any claim on it. I don't know why she put your name on a document like that, but she didn't put my name on it, I said. She asked me to sign it. A long silence. $2 million, I said. That's approximately what I received when I sold my house in Phoenix and liquidated my retirement accounts at your wife's request 8 months ago. I gave it to her as a loan for business operations, secured against the property because she insisted on proper documentation. She was thorough about these things. A loan, he said. The word sounded like a stone dropped into still water. She borrowed $2 million from you. She did. The terms were her idea. 60 days post-maturity, she said. I paused, letting myself remember her voice, letting myself feel it for one private moment. She said she wanted it structured cleanly, so there was no ambiguity. Another silence. Then his voice changed, dropped lower, harder, the politeness dissolving. You're doing this on purpose. You and her, you planned this. You're trying to... I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm a secured creditor with a defaulted note. That's a legal status, not a plan. Don't give me that, he caught himself. His voice, when it came back, had shifted again. Strategic now. Look, Raymond, we don't have to make this adversarial. I know you and Claire were close. I know this has been hard for you. It's been hard for me too. The warmth in his voice was like a veneer applied over wet wood. You could see the grain underneath. The company, the stock. I understand now it's not a liquid asset. I've been speaking with advisors about the sale process, and there's apparently there's an approval structure in the operating agreement. A pause in which he almost said something he'd thought better of. I want to do this right. If you'll work with me on the house sale and on approving the company sale, I'll take care of you. 10% of the company proceeds. That's $4.5 million, Raymond. He said it the way people say large numbers when they believe large numbers solve things. I appreciate the offer, I said. I'll need to speak with my attorney. I'll be in touch. And I ended the call. Frank was watching me from across the yard. He had heard my half of the conversation and had been quiet throughout with the discipline of a man who understood that some things required stillness. The company too, I said. What about it? He needs my approval to sell his stake. Claire put it in the operating agreement. As the last founding member board seat, I have veto rights over any sale or transfer of founding shares. I set my phone down on the armrest and picked up my iced tea. She gave him everything. She gave him the title and the stock and the house. She signed it all over in the will because she wanted to. I stopped for a moment. Because she was still, even at the end, giving him the benefit of the doubt she probably always knew he didn't deserve. Frank looked at me steadily. But she also knew me, I said. She knew her father. She knew I had sold everything I owned to be there for her. And she knew what he would do with the information that she was gone, and I had no home to go back to. I looked at Frank. She built the structure so it would stand, with or without her. The call to the attorney's office came the next morning. Not my attorney, hers. The one she had asked me to memorize the number for. 6 months ago, on a piece of paper she'd had me keep in my wallet without explanation, until now. The office was in a low, elegant building in downtown Scottsdale, the kind of place that didn't advertise because it didn't need to. The attorney was a woman named Patricia Chen, 60, with silver-streaked hair and the particular stillness of someone who had been the smartest person in too many rooms to feel the need to announce it. She stood when I came in and shook my hand and said, "Mr. Harmon, I've been waiting for your call. Not, I'm sorry for your loss. Not, how are you holding up? Just, I've been waiting." Like the next phase of a project was ready to begin. She had a file on her desk that I recognized the same structured thickness as a serious piece of engineering work, every page in its place. "Your daughter was the most prepared client I've ever had," she said, sitting back down. "She began working on this structure 9 months ago. She updated it twice in the final weeks. She wanted to be sure it would hold under pressure." I sat down across from her, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something I could only identify as my daughter's presence, not grief, not absence, but the specific sensation of her intelligence, still operating in the world. "Tell me what she built," I said. Patricia Chen opened the file and told me. The will was real, and it was clean, and it was exactly what the estate attorney had read. My son-in-law inherited the company stock and the house. That was the visible structure, the facade. What he couldn't see were the load-bearing walls inside. The operating agreement for Cloud Nest Solutions contained a founder's consent clause. It had always been there. Since the company was first structured as a private corporation, no sale or transfer of founding member shares could be executed without unanimous written consent from the founding board. Claire had been the only active founder. At the time of her death, she transferred her board seat, not her stock, just the seat to one remaining named successor, Raymond Harmon. She had done this 9 months ago. My son-in-law had never known it existed. The promissory note was exactly what I'd told him it was. $2 million, properly documented, secured by the property, with a maturity clause keyed to Claire's death. It was filed with the county recorder 14 months ago. It was as legally solid as anything I had ever signed. And there was one more thing. A provision in the living trust that neither the will nor the operating agreement had mentioned. A directive from Claire, written in her own words, about what the structure was actually for. Patricia Chen read it to me, Claire's voice in the language, even through the legal formality of a trust document. The loan lien on the property and the founder's consent requirement on the company shares are not punitive instruments. They are a test of character. I know my husband. I know my father. If my husband, upon learning of my death, treats my father with basic dignity, if he allows my father to grieve in his home, if he acknowledges my father's sacrifice, if he offers my father the basic human decency of continued presence in the family, then the structure is unnecessary. The loan should be forgiven. The board seat should be exercised to approve any reasonable company sale. The test is simple. Does he treat Raymond Harmon like family or like furniture? I sat very still while Patricia Chen read those words. If he fails the test within the first 72 hours after my death, the full structure activates as designed. I thought about standing in Claire's office the evening of the funeral. The loosened tie, the dry eyes. "You're a guest here, Raymond. You've always been a guest. Don't forget that." Less than 4 hours after we put her in the ground. "She built it perfectly," I said. "She did," Patricia Chen said. I had been waiting for his call for 2 days when it finally came, and the difference between this call and the last one was the difference between a man negotiating and a man drowning. The voice that came through the phone was unrecognizable as the same person who had stood in Claire's office doorway looking like a man beginning the most exciting chapter of his life. This voice had been scraped down to something raw and frightened. "Raymond." A breath that caught on the edges. I need to talk to you. In person. Please." I told him to come to Patricia Chen's office the following morning at 9. Can't we talk privately? You and me?" "Without 9 o'clock," I said, and I ended the call. He was 4 minutes late. I had been there for 20, sitting in the chair that had become mine over the past several visits, my hands resting on the table, a glass of water in front of me. Patricia was at the head of the table with a thin, precise folder. We had been ready for 30 minutes before he arrived. He came in alone, no attorney. That told me everything. Either he couldn't afford one yet, or he hadn't found one willing to take his case, which meant the ones he'd consulted had already assessed the situation and told him something he didn't want to hear. He looked like a different person, not dramatically, so the expensive clothes were still there. The watch, the pressed shirt, but underneath all of it, there was a new quality, a thinness, like a building after the non-load-bearing walls have been removed. He sat down across from me. He started to speak. "Raymond, his voice broke. He looked down, pressed his fingers to his eyes, and when he looked up again, there were tears, real ones this time. I could see the difference. I know I handled this badly. The night of the funeral, I wasn't myself. I was grieving, and I was scared. He shook his head. The way I spoke to you, the way I asked you to leave, it was wrong. I know it was wrong. I said nothing. I've been trying to understand everything Claire set up, and it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. He exhaled, reaching across the table with both hands spread open, a gesture of offering. But I think we can figure this out together. That's all I want, to figure it out together. For Claire. The invocation of her name in his mouth landed in the room and sat there. I looked at him steadily. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. He was waiting for me to soften, to lean in, to tell him we could work something out, to act like the old man he'd always treated me as reactive, manageable, ultimately harmless. Patricia Chen set her hands flat on the file. "Mr. Harmon," she said, addressing me, not him. "Should I explain the situation?" I nodded. She opened the file with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom this had been a long time coming. She laid it out without drama and without mercy, the way a structural engineer explains why a building failed. The operating agreement clause. The promissory note and its maturity date, the default. The foreclosure rights under the security agreement. The living trust provision, the board consent requirement. He listened with the expression of a man being shown the exact mechanism of his own ruin. Each piece landed and he tried to absorb it and move to the next piece, and the cumulative weight of it was visible on his face. When she finished, he was very still for a long moment. "The test," he finally said. His voice was barely audible. "She wrote that I was being tested." "She did," Patricia said. "Within 72 hours, he closed his eyes. I had you out of the house by 11 o'clock. "You did," I said. The first thing I'd said since he walked in. He opened his eyes and looked at me. There was something there, not shame, exactly, but the shape of where shame might have lived if he'd had more of it. She knew I would. She built this whole thing knowing I would. "She knew who you were," I said. I kept my voice even. Not cruel, not triumphant. "She loved you for a long time, in spite of that. But she also knew her father. She knew what it had cost me to be there. And she was not, in the end, willing to leave that unprotected." A silence settled over the room. He stared at the table. His hands were clasped in front of him like a man praying to something he wasn't sure was listening. "So what happens now?" he said. "Not a question, a surrender." Patricia opened the second part of the file. "You have two options," she said. "The first is to fight. You retain counsel. You contest the lien in court. You challenge the operating agreement. Your argument would likely be fraud, undue influence, some form of wrongful deprivation of inheritance rights." She looked at him directly. "We would welcome that path. Every document in this file was prepared by a board-certified estate attorney, signed with full witnesses, and filed properly in every relevant jurisdiction. A judge would look at this case for 30 minutes and tell you what I'm telling you now. You would lose. The foreclosure would proceed. You would be removed from the property by court order. The company's stock would remain locked because I would exercise the veto on every sale attempt indefinitely. You would walk away with legal fees, a public record, and nothing else." He looked like he'd already heard this from someone else. Probably the attorney he'd called and been told the unfun version of events by. "The second option," Patricia continued, "is the one Claire prepared for this specific outcome. The one she wrote because she knew your character, and she was, even then, even in what she knew, still choosing to give you a path out that wasn't ruin." She placed a cashier's check at the edge of the table, just beyond his reach. His eyes went to it immediately. "You sign a full and irrevocable relinquishment of your stake in Cloudnest Solutions. All of it transferred immediately to the Claire Harmon Foundation, a charitable trust for ALS research and patient family support, administered by Raymond Harmon as founding trustee." She slid a document beside the check. "You vacate the property within 48 hours. You make no further claim on any asset of the estate." She let that settle. "In return, Raymond, as secured creditor and board sole authority, Will forgive the accrued interest on the promissory note, waive any additional default penalties, and authorize this one-time disbursement. She moved the check 1 inch closer. $250,000. Tax-free. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear cleanly. He stared at the check. His jaw worked. "There's no 45 million, Patricia said, with the gentleness of someone who understood that the truth sometimes needed to be delivered rather than inferred. "There's no house sale. There's no negotiation. There's a piece of paper, and there's a check, and there's the choice your wife left you." She paused. She was generous, even at the end. She did not want you to be destroyed. She wanted you to go. His attorney and I knew now he had consulted one, because his next words had the shape of advice he'd received, and hated said nothing, because he wasn't there. There was no one to put a hand on his arm and tell him to think it over. He picked up the pen. He looked at me one more time, and I want to be honest about what was in his eyes at that moment, because I've thought about it many times since. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't the cold contempt of the man who had pushed me out of the door the night of the funeral. What was there was something smaller and stranger, a kind of recognition, the recognition of someone who has finally, too late, understood the dimensions of what they were standing next to all along and mistook for nothing. "She was remarkable," he said, to me, quietly. "Yes," I said. "She was." He signed his name on the document. He took the check. He left the folder on the table and walked out of the conference room without looking back, and I heard his footsteps cross the lobby and the front door of the building open and close, and then there was silence. Patricia sat down. She looked at me across the table, not with triumph, but with a careful, respectful quiet. "She told me," Patricia said, "that if this day ever came, I should tell you, the building always outlasts the storm." I put my hand over my eyes for a moment. Just a moment. 48 hours later, as the agreement required, he was gone. He left in a rideshare. He did not take Claire's furniture, or Claire's books, or the framed photos of the two of us that she had arranged along the hallway. I've been told he took one bag and the check, and nothing else. What happened after was practical and clean, the way good design always is. The Claire Harmon Foundation took control of the Cloud Nest Solutions shares. Patricia, acting as foundation counsel, initiated a proper sale process, structured, patient, priced correctly. A strategic buyer in the cloud infrastructure space took 18 months to close, but they closed cleanly at $51 million. My daughter's company sold for more after her death than it had been valued at when she was alive. She would have found that extremely satisfying. The $2 million note was satisfied from the sale proceeds. My money, the money I had gotten from my house in Phoenix, the retirement I had built over 35 years, came back to me in full. I did not buy a big house. I bought a small place outside Flagstaff, up in the pines, with a porch that faces west and a view that changes every hour as the light moves across the mountains. It is quiet, in a way that feels earned. Claire and I had talked once about what we'd do when we were both old. She'd always said she wanted to move to the mountains, that the desert was beautiful, but the pines were something else entirely. I think about that when I sit on the porch in the evenings. I am 64 years old. I have lost my daughter. I carry that loss the way a building carries a structural modification. It changes the load path, redistributes the weight, and you learn to build around it with care rather than try to pretend it isn't there. I will carry it the rest of my life, and I do not want to stop carrying it. What I have is what she gave me, her name carried forward. The Claire Harmon Foundation has, in its first operating year, provided financial assistance to 43 families navigating ALS diagnoses. 43 families helped with the caregiver costs, the adaptive equipment, the logistical nightmares that my daughter knew from the inside. I think about something she said to me once, years ago, when she was first building the company, and I asked her what she was most proud of. Not the revenue numbers, not the client list. She thought about it for a while, and then she said, "The part that would still work even if I wasn't there anymore, Dad. That's the part I'm most proud of." She built that. In the end, in the last 9 months of her life, when she was losing her body piece by piece, she sat down with an attorney, and she built the most important structure of her career. Not a company, Not a product, but a system of justice, quiet and patient and load-bearing, designed to stand and function long after she was gone. My silence, in those weeks after the funeral, was the time the foundation needed to cure. I have been an architect for 35 years, and the one thing I know with certainty is this: you cannot rush the cure time. You cannot rush the concrete. You pour it correctly, you leave it alone, and you trust the structure. My daughter was an architect. She poured it correctly, and at the end, when the storm came for it, it stood. What would you have done in my position? Have you ever had to trust someone else's plan completely, on nothing but faith? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story reached you tonight, if it meant something to you, please subscribe to Midnight Vengeance. I'll see you in the next one.